Thank you, President Peter. I am super excited today to introduce our guest speaker, Lani Evans. So, as Peter touched on, Lani is the manager of the New Zealand Vodafone Foundation and an advocate for generosity in all its forms. She has a background in community work with a strong youth development focus and was a 2015 Winston Churchill Fellow, looking at participatory practice in philanthropy. Lani is the co-chair of Action Station, chair and founder of the Thank You Charitable Trust, and board member of the J.R. Mackenzie Trusts and Peter Mackenzie Project. And Lani is also the director of social enterprise Thank You Payroll. And just as a side note, Thank You Payroll is an outstanding example of how to weave social impact into every layer of business activity. Today we're going to hear more about the work of the Vodafone Foundation, halving the number of young people at risk. So Lani, we're really excited for this opportunity to understand more about this important work.
Ko kia ora koutou, ko Z14CAB te wakarererangi, ko Brisbane te awa, ko Cloud Kacha te maunga, ko Lani Evans ahau. So today is the start of Māori Language Week, so I thought I'd kick things off with my introduction in te reo. Unfortunately, my reo isn't good enough to do the whole thing, so I'm going to do the rest in English. And I'd also like to say thank you so much for acknowledging that it is World Suicide Day. That's such an important topic and one that is very close to my heart and to the work that we do at the Foundation as well. So really important that that's something that we continue to talk about. Cool. So thank you so much for having me here today. I really appreciate it. And it's a real privilege to speak about the work that I do at the Vodafone Foundation and about our goals for the future. It's also a privilege because in 2012 I was the recipient of a Rotary Group study exchange, and I spent 6 weeks in Canada visiting and staying with Rotarians in the Northwest, which was a real privilege and gave me a real sense of the work that has been done by Rotary around the world. And it's very nice to connect back into what you're doing here in New Zealand. There are already a lot of connections here in the room. There's a few people who have already been connected to the Vodafone Foundation and to other pieces of work that we've done. So very nice to meet you all. So the Vodafone Foundation has 27 foundations around the world. We've been operating for 26 years globally and for 15 years in a local context. In New Zealand, we've had an exclusive focus on youth development outcomes since 2007, and we've contributed around $27 million to communities, primarily through our World of Difference program. So the World of Difference program is a funding program that provides support to individuals who want to work on youth development projects in their communities for a period of 1 year. It's been an incredible catalyst for change, and it's developed a lot of the great younger leaders that we're seeing working in the community sector today. But after 15 years and more than 100 participants, we decided it was time for us to review what we were doing. Cool. So we decided to go through an evaluation and strategic review process, and we started that with 3 key questions for ourselves. 1, is our current funding moving the dial for excluded and disadvantaged young people? 2, are we generating the best outcomes for the sector and for the recipients of our funds? And 3, are we making the most of our unique position? We wanted to be as thoughtful and as inclusive as possible. So we commissioned an evaluation of historic work, a literature review, a social psychology study, an economic analysis, and conducted stakeholder hui around the country. We really wanted to know what's the best way that we can make change for our young people. And we found some really great things. We found a strong network of people who know about and have contributed to our work in the past, an appreciation for the high trust funding models that we use, and we also found some unintended consequences to the work we were doing. The people who had been recipients of our World of Difference program had incredibly high levels of civic engagement, off the scales passion about their community and dedication to seeing change happen. But sitting alongside that, they also had low levels of resilience. So our work, the way that we were funding people and supporting them, was contributing to burnout in a sector that already has problems with overwork. We also found that the way that we were funding, focusing on individuals, was excluding kaupapa Māori organisations, because kaupapa Māori organisations are all about all of us in this together. So we found that there were some ways that we were working that were preventing the outcomes we were looking for from happening. So at the end of 6 months of conversation, we landed on our new strategy. We wanted to keep the good elements of the work we were doing and keep improving. We wanted to engage our radical side and push boundaries in grant making and philanthropy. We wanted to leverage the power of Vodafone by aligning more strongly with the kaupapa of the business, and we wanted to focus more narrowly on excluded and disadvantaged young people. So when we're talking about excluded and disadvantaged young people in our context, we're talking about young people who fit into these 4 groups. This is based on the IDI data, the integrated data infrastructure, which is information that comes out of Treasury. And it indicates that young people who've been in child, youth and family, or oranga tamariki, young people who've had a care and protection order, those who've been mostly supported by benefits since birth, so those who've had 75% or more of their life on benefits, those who have a parent with a prison or community sentence, and at the moment we have the highest ever level of people in prisons in New Zealand. We have over 10,000 people in prison, which means about 30,000 young people. And those who have a mother with no qualification. Young people with 2 or more of these risk factors tend to have less positive outcomes in the future. But about 35% of the young people who fall into these categories have excellent outcomes. So what are the protective factors? What are the things that make their lives, that help them to move past these barriers and go on to lead the lives that they want to? We use the IDI, the Integrated Data Infrastructure, as a baseline of measurement. But one of the problems with that as a way of measuring what exclusion and disadvantage looks like in New Zealand is that it only measures from a deficit perspective. It doesn't tell us what the good things are that are happening in young people's lives, and it doesn't tell us how we can continue to grow and develop those things. So that's one of the challenges that we face. So our goal is $20 million and 10 years to halve the number of young people at risk in New Zealand. According to the statistics, there are 210,000 young people who fit into those categories. And depending on your perspective, $20 million and 10 years either sounds like a lot or it sounds like a little. And from my perspective, it's definitely a little. You probably know all of the statistics around young people in New Zealand at the moment, all of those deficit things around the highest level of suicide in OECD, the 16% of young people and children living in material poverty. We are topping the charts on all of the statistics for young people that we don't want to. So we've got a lot of work to do, and I think it's an obligation for us to work together to make those changes. So we wanted to frame a goal that was bigger than what we could possibly do on our own, as an impetus for collaboration. We know we can't do this by ourselves, and frankly, I don't think that we should try. We're moving away from our individual focus for our funding, and we want to move away from an individual focus in our philanthropy as well. And we hope that this goal, halving the number of young people at risk, will be a call to action for others: government, philanthropy, community organisations, Māori and iwi organisations, and other corporates. And we don't need to be at the centre of this. It's about the work, it's not about us. So what we're doing, we have 4 pieces of work. We have innovation, collaboration, disruption, and leveraging the power of Vodafone. And this year is very much focused on innovation. So we're just about to launch our first accelerator program for community organisations in Christchurch next week. And we've also just had our innovation fund. And that's seeing us fund things like Methodist Mission in Dunedin, who are going to be using VR to teach young people who are within the prison system how to do really practical things. If you want to be a mechanic and you can't get to tools, we're going to use VR to actually teach you those skills. We're going to do the same thing with plumbing. Youthline is going to try digital mentoring. There are all these ways that we're engaging innovation to try and create better outcomes for these young people. And it also includes a project we're doing with Zeal, who I know that you are funding as well. So we're working with Zeal to work on an online crisis intervention service. So they are using scraping algorithms that search for and pick up keywords that indicate suicidality on Instagram and Tumblr. So if a young person is making a comment on Instagram that says something like, "end it all," the algorithm will pick it up, and the volunteers, the trained volunteers from Zeal, can then send a direct message intervention to that young person and say, "Hey, are you okay? Is there anything I can do to help? Do you want to be connected to services in your region?" So we really hope that things like that, these innovatively focused pieces of work, can have transformative impacts, but at scale. Our collaboration and disruption funds are a little harder to describe. They'll be focused on funding interventions that respond to key issues affecting young people. These will be non-contestable funds, and they're things like, we've been working with Oranga Tamariki, with Todd, Tyndall and Foundation North on the development of Voice Whakarongo Mai. It's a Crown-funded independent entity that's going to hear the voices of the 5,500 children and young people in our care system, the children and young people who have the worst outcomes in New Zealand. So what are the other ways that we can have those sorts of interventions, that we can collaborate and work together to really impact the lives of those young people? And we also want to leverage the power of Vodafone. So we have 3,000 staff who've got incredibly varied skills, who have families, who are connected to communities, and who are empathetic individuals. The skills and expertise that they have are things that are not easy to access for community organisations. So how can we use that to generate change? I wanted to show you a couple of examples that are already in existence that demonstrate the ways in which Vodafone, a big multinational telecommunications company, has had real impacts on communities. One of the biggest examples is probably M-Pesa. So M-Pesa is a digital platform that allows people to create financial transactions using their cell phones. So for a lot of people, there's no way that they can access traditional banking and financial services, either because they don't have identification, or they don't have enough money to start a bank account, or they simply can't geographically get to a bank. So we've developed M-Pesa. People can use their cell phones to transfer money between each other. We've now got about 25 million users in Africa, primarily in Kenya, using this as a service. And when we're thinking about people who don't have access to financial service, we often think about people who are living in developing nations. But actually, the World Bank suggests there's between 6 and 8% of New Zealanders who are also unbanked. It's not just a problem of overseas, it's also a problem that we have here. So that's one example of using the technology of Vodafone and the Vodafone Foundation to create change. Another, a little closer to home, is the work of the Moko Foundation, which is run by the omnipresent Dr. Lance O'Sullivan, who many of you I'm sure will have heard of. He's one of our long-term partners, and we've been funding them to develop a mobile innovation hub. So it's essentially a digitally connected bus that's travelling around all of the rural and isolated regions of the far north, teaching young people the skills to do coding and to engage with the online world in ways they wouldn't have access to. And the idea of it is that it gives them the opportunity to be the creators of things online, rather than just the passive recipients of information and data. And alongside that, they've also just launched their first virtual medical centre, which has been set up in Patia in the far north, which is a town that has no doctor. So they're using the internet to give rural whānau access to medical services. And we're just about to start trialling actually delivering prescriptions to those people using drones and using marae as the base, so people can go to the marae, pick up their medicines, and not have to travel the 3 or 4 or 5 hours to a doctor when they're in an emergency situation. And that's a really interesting one for me because that's already been used in Rwanda to deliver vaccinations and to also deliver blood for transfusions to people who are in isolated communities. So there's huge potential there. And finally, I just wanted to talk briefly about the Instant Network. So Cyclone Irma is currently in Florida. It's disrupting the lives of, they think, up to 3 million people. And right now we have a trained group of Vodafone staff from Hungary, the Netherlands and Spain on their way to Guadeloupe to provide communication support in the areas worst affected by the hurricane. So Instant Network deploys people and technology to provide free communications and technical support in areas that are affected by natural and humanitarian disasters. This will be our 11th deployment, working alongside the NGO Telecom Sans Frontières to help re-establish mobile connections, help aid workers communicate during the relief effort, and to enable people to contact their loved ones. We have a team of 6 heat-trained volunteers in New Zealand who go out in emergencies, and they've been deployed 3 times in the last 3 years. And we're expecting that number to increase. The Pacific is going to be affected more and more by climate change, and we need to find ways that we can work together and work with aid organisations and governments internationally to provide the support people need when those things happen. So, all of these things that are happening with us as an organisation, and I imagine with lots of other organisations like yours as well, they require us to think about the way we interact with the world a little bit differently. And I also think that they mean that we need to be looking internally at the way we operate. I think the strategic review that we did really showed that the best of intentions can sometimes be problematic. So how are we working to be more consistent in understanding the impacts we have, both the positive things, the wonderful things, and also the unintended consequences of the way that we interact with the world? For me also, what we're thinking about a lot at the moment is how we can be treaty partners. 60% of the young people that fit into those high-risk categories for us, 60% of them are Māori. So what does that mean for us as a Pākehā organisation? How can we interact in ways that are authentic, in ways that are respectful, in ways that are constantly iterating and learning with Māori? We also need to understand our limitations. We might have access to technology and influence, but how do we use those things well? And how can we partner well with those who can do the things we can't? And finally, how do we use our power wisely? And I think this probably applies to you as well. We have financial capital, we have human capital, and we have the power of all of the networks and connections that exist for us. So how do we make sure that we use that power in ways that are participatory, in ways that are connected to grassroots communities who do the real work, and make sure that that work that we do helps to generate real change and real outcomes for our communities? For me, what we're doing is a lot of change, and I think it's really important change, but we're going to iterate and take it slow, and I'm absolutely sure that we're going to mess it up, but we're going to keep learning and keep trying to do better. And hopefully, in 10 years, I can come back and see you and be telling you that we have actually halved the number of young people at risk in New Zealand. So, kia ora.
Lani's happy to take questions. Have we got any questions? No? Richard.
What's the funding foundation? Is it a percentage of customers who do that as a company self-do it?
Yeah, it's. I wish it was a percentage of customers, and I'd be trying to get you all on Vodafone right now. No, so we receive our funding primarily from the Vodafone Group. So we get about we get between $2 and $3 million per year, and we get half of it from the UK and half of it from the Vodafone in New Zealand. And generally, that amount is set by Vodafone in the UK, and then the local company matches it. One of the things that's different for us about what we're doing now is that the company, the corporate, has agreed that they have given us a guarantee that they'll give us funding for the next 10 years, which is exciting in the context that I operate in. Yeah.
Anybody? John.
In the leadership debate, the Prime Minister put forward the idea of, I think, removing 20,000 young people from poverty. If my numbers are right, and he was challenged to double it, and he did. Are you plugging into that program? Is that an intrinsic part of what you do?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of these things are interrelated. I think poverty, material poverty, is definitely one of the greatest causes of disadvantage for young people and of exclusion. And I think we hear examples of this all the time. Some of the young people that we work with up north, they have a family with 3 children and they only have one school uniform. And the school has a compulsory uniform rule, so the children cycle between who gets to go to school. So the ways in which poverty impacts these young people are incredibly significant. Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see post-election who we get to work with on that.
Time for one more. Lee.
Yeah, absolutely. You can have a chat to me. I think one of the things that's interesting too about where things are moving is that we formally thought about, okay, well, social media will be us going out to young people and us connecting with people, but things like it kind of relied on an intervention model that said, you know, you need to come to our website or you need to like our page. And one of the nice things that Zeal is doing it the opposite way around. They're going, well, here's where young people are, let's move to them. So it's like a mobile service, it's like a bus or a doctor that comes to your house instead of you having to go to it. But yes, sorry, that was an aside to your question. You can definitely, let's have a chat after. Cool.
Thanks. Leanna, would you like to thank our guest?
So halving the number of young people at risk is a bold and courageous goal. And what's really exciting is that Vodafone are taking a strengths-based approach to tackling this. So leveraging what's working well and co-creating to create meaningful change. And I love the mindset of we'll keep learning and trying to be better. So Lani, I'd like to invite you all to join me in thanking Lani for a very inspiring